Good day, everyone. Tonight we are watching a war that is no longer confined to the battlefield because it has just reached the wallets of every single American driver. Oil prices have jumped roughly 4% in the last day alone, pushing Brent crude briefly above $95 a barrel. That is a $20 surge since. Fighting between the United States and Iran resumed on July 7th, and it is only the beginning of what could come next. Because right now, President Trump is threatening something no American president has openly promised before. For every ship Iran strikes in the Strait of Hormuz, the United States will destroy an Iranian bridge or a power plant in response. That is not analysis, that is a direct threat from the commander-in-chief and its signals. A dangerous new phase in a war that has already been raging for 11 consecutive nights. Here is why this moment matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points in the entire global economy, and roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply moves through it every single day. If that route becomes unusable, energy markets everywhere feel it, and so does every American filling up their car at the pump. Gas prices are already climbing, with reports out of Georgia showing a jump of nearly 20 cents in a single week as the national average pushes toward $4 a gallon. So let's walk through exactly how we got here, because the last 11 days have moved incredibly fast. According to U.S. Central Command, American forces completed their 11th consecutive night of strikes on Iran, hitting aircraft hangars, drone storage sites, and operations centers. The stated goal, according to CENTCOM, is to further degrade Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping through the strait. But that goal is running headfirst into a very different reality on the water. CENTCOM itself acknowledged that Iran has carried out more than 30 attacks on commercial vessels over the past 3 months. Those attacks, the military says, have endangered hundreds of innocent mariners and undermined freedom of navigation in one of the most important waterways on the planet. Meanwhile, the human cost inside. The American military is mounting fast. The Pentagon has now confirmed that 18 U.S. service members have been killed since this war began. Among the latest, 3 American soldiers were killed in an Iranian strike on the Muaffaq Salti air base in Jordan over the weekend. The Pentagon has identified them as Army Sergeant Angel Rampersad, Private Isabella Gonzalez, and First Lieutenant Tyler James Fian. A fourth service member was killed in Iraq during the controlled detonation of a downed Iranian drone. President Trump is expected to attend a dignified transfer of remains at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, though it has not yet been confirmed which fallen troops will be honored in that ceremony. But that's only part of the story, because the fighting is no longer staying inside Iran and its immediate surroundings. Iran has expanded its retaliatory strikes to hit Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan, dragging America's closest regional partners directly into the line of fire. Jordan's military said it shot down for Iranian missiles. On Wednesday, while 2 others struck uninhabited areas without causing casualties, Iranian state media, through the semi-official Fars news agency, claimed its forces had targeted a storage depot at the Al Azraq air base in Jordan using drones. Here's where things become even more significant. Pakistan has now publicly weighed in, saying it is deeply concerned about attempts to drag Saudi Arabia into this widening Middle East conflict. Islamabad, which signed a mutual defense pact with Riyadh only last year, condemned threats from Yemen's Houthi rebels against the kingdom and against Red Sea shipping. Pakistan's foreign ministry warned that any hostile act against Pakistani-flagged vessels would be treated as a grave threat to its own national security. That warning matters because it shows how quickly alliances across the region are being tested. What started as a confrontation between Washington and Tehran is now pulling in Gulf monarchies, South Asian powers, and shipping nations from around the world. However, the bigger question is whether the Strait of Hormuz is actually still functioning the way the Pentagon claims. CENTCOM insists the strait remains open for commercial vessel traffic despite the ongoing attacks. But the reality on the water tells a very different story. The Joint Maritime Information Center in Bahrain reported that commercial traffic through the strait fell to a 3-week low, with CBS News tracking only 3 commercial ships passing through on a single day this week, according to a Lloyd's List analysis between July 13th and 19th. Only 2 ships used the U.S.-backed southern route that hugs the coast of Oman. Both of those transits were described as dark, meaning the vessels had switched off their tracking systems to avoid detection. The head of a Greek maritime risk management firm told CBS News that ship crews are simply unwilling to make the journey anymore. He explained that while nothing is technically blocking a determined vessel from transiting the strait, large ocean-going international merchant ships are effectively refusing to go through. This is where the situation becomes more complicated, because Iran is not backing down from its claim over the waterway. An Iranian Interior Ministry spokesperson declared this week that the Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran, calling it the heart of the country. He went further, warning that anyone who fails to respect Iran's history in the region would disappear beneath the waters of the strait. Statements like that are important to flag clearly as rhetoric from an Iranian official, not as a neutral assessment of the situation. What happened next surprised many observers watching the financial markets. Analysts are now openly discussing scenarios where oil could shoot past $100 a barrel. An analyst at Infrastructure Capital Management told Bloomberg that markets currently expect prices in the $80 to $90 range depending on how the news develops. But he cautioned that if the Red Sea route through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait actually closes, that could push prices well beyond the $100 mark. That threat is not hypothetical either. Yemen's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels have signaled they may try to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is the only entrance to the Red Sea besides the much longer route around the Suez Canal. President Trump responded directly to that threat, saying he would take care of the Houthis if they follow through on blocking Saudi Arabia's Red Sea ports. That statement alone signals Washington is prepared to open yet another front if the Houthis escalate their involvement. The implications extend far beyond today's headlines and straight into the American economy. Rising oil prices translate almost immediately into rising prices at the gas pump, and that touches every single American household regardless of politics. It also raises pointed questions on Capitol Hill about how much this war is actually costing. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee this week that the war has cost approximately $37.5 billion so far. That figure came in response to direct questioning from Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. Hegseth explained the number reflects projected costs through the end of the fiscal year, including expenses like troop pay. But here's where the story gets murkier. According to CBS News, two Democratic sources, along with a third source familiar with the matter, say the real cost of this war is likely far higher than Hegseth's public estimate. Part of the reason, these sources say, is that the current figure does not include costs tied to rebuilding damaged American military infrastructure. If accurate, that means taxpayers could be facing a bill that grows substantially beyond what has been officially disclosed so far. Meanwhile, there is a quieter diplomatic thread running alongside all of this military escalation. Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said this week that Beirut is actively working toward what he called a complete Israeli withdrawal from areas it currently occupies in southern Lebanon. He made those comments during a visit to a village where the Lebanese army recently deployed as part of a broader effort. That effort is tied to a Washington-sponsored arrangement designed to demonstrate that Lebanon's own army can disarm the Iran-backed group Hezbollah in designated pilot zones. Lebanon and Israel are currently engaged in direct talks sponsored by the United States. That detail is worth remembering because it shows that even as bombs fall elsewhere in the region, a separate diplomatic track involving Lebanon and Israel is still quietly moving forward. Now let's step back and look at how all of these threads connect to one another. On one side, you have direct military escalation between the United States and Iran, with American strikes hitting Iranian territory nightly and Iranian retaliation hitting American allies across the Gulf. On another side, you have a fragile diplomatic process in Lebanon that could either collapse under regional pressure or continue moving forward despite it. And connecting both of these threads is the economic reality of oil prices, shipping disruptions, and a growing bill in Washington that lawmakers are only beginning to fully understand. This is precisely why global markets are reacting the way they are. Investors are not just pricing in the current strikes, they are pricing in the risk that this war expands to a second maritime choke point at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. If both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb become effectively unusable for major shipping companies, the disruption to global energy markets would be significant. That is the scenario analysts are warning about, even though it has not yet fully materialized. Let's also look closer at what Trump's specific threat actually means. Going forward, his pledge to strike an Iranian bridge or power plant for every ship attacked in the strait suggests a shift toward a more mechanical, tit-for-tat form of retaliation. Instead of broader, less predictable strikes, this approach ties American military action directly to Iranian maritime aggression on a one-to-one basis. Whether that actually deters Iran's attacks on shipping or simply escalates the cycle further remains to be seen in the days ahead. It is worth noting that this is analysis rather than confirmed reporting, since we do not yet know how Iran will respond to this specific new threat. But given Iran's pattern of retaliating against strikes with attacks on regional partners, further escalation involving Gulf states appears to be a real possibility. Meanwhile, the human toll inside Iran itself should not be overlooked either. Reporting from the region has described ordinary Iranians struggling to get by amid the war and the country's existing domestic economic problems. That civilian hardship rarely makes the biggest headlines, but it shapes the political pressure facing Iran's leadership at home. A government fighting a costly war abroad while its own population faces economic strain is operating under significant internal pressure, even if that pressure does not immediately translate into policy change. So, what could realistically happen next? Based on current reporting, a few scenarios appear most plausible, though none of them are confirmed outcomes. The first scenario involves continued nightly American strikes paired with continued Iranian attacks on shipping, essentially a prolonged war of attrition. In this scenario, oil prices likely keep climbing gradually, and the financial cost to the United States keeps rising alongside Hegseth's already contested estimate. The second scenario involves further escalation through the Houthis actually attempting to close the Bab el Mandeb Strait. Analysts have warned that this could push oil prices past $100 a barrel, which would ripple through gas prices and inflation figures across the United States almost immediately. The third scenario, and arguably the most fragile one, involves the Lebanon-Israel diplomatic track either collapsing under the weight of wider regional violence or somehow continuing on its own separate path. Right now, it remains too early to say which of these directions the region is truly heading toward. What we can say with confidence is that the current trajectory is not sustainable indefinitely. 18 American service members have already died. Tens of billions of dollars have already been spent by conservative estimates, and oil markets are already reacting nervously to every new headline out of the Gulf. Whether that trajectory bends toward de escalation, toward a wider regional war, or toward some new diplomatic breakthrough is something only the coming days and weeks will reveal. For now, the fighting continues, the shipping lanes remain dangerously thin, and Washington's price tag keeps climbing. Before we wrap up, it's worth remembering just how fast this situation has evolved. Just over 2 weeks ago, on July 7th, the ceasefire like calm between the US and Iran broke down and fighting resumed. Since then, we have gone from renewed airstrikes to a full-blown regional crisis touching Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. That is an extraordinary escalation in a remarkably short window of time, and it underscores just how quickly this story could shift again by the time you finish watching this video. It also highlights why credible, sourced reporting matters more now than ever. With claims coming from CENTCOM, Iranian state media, Jordanian officials, and independent shipping analysts all at once, sorting confirmed fact from official messaging is not always simple. That's exactly why we've tried to walk you through, step by step, what is officially confirmed, what is contested, and what remains genuine uncertainty. The picture that emerges is one of a conflict that is expanding in scope, expanding in cost, and expanding in risk to the global economy all at the same time. As always, we will continue tracking this story closely as new developments emerge from the region. This is a fluid, fast-moving situation, and what is true today could shift by tomorrow morning. So here's what we're watching most closely in the days ahead. First, whether Iran responds to Trump's bridge and power plant threat with a change in its shipping attacks, or whether it escalates further regardless of the warning. Second, whether the Houthis actually attempt to block the Bab el Mandeb Strait, which multiple analysts have flagged as the single biggest risk to a much sharper oil price spike. And third, whether Congress pushes back harder on the true cost of this war, especially after sources told CBS News that Hegseth's $37.5 billion estimate likely understates the real total. All three of these threads are moving simultaneously, and any one of them could become the dominant headline within days. That is exactly why this story deserves your continued attention rather than a single passing glance. Before we go, let's bring it back to why this matters for you directly, sitting at home in the United States. Rising oil prices are not an abstract geopolitical statistic. They show up in your grocery delivery costs, your commute, and your monthly budget. The war's financial cost, whether it's $37 billion or significantly more, is ultimately a cost borne by American taxpayers, and the human cost, 18 service members and counting, represents real families who are grieving losses that trace directly back to decisions being made in this widening conflict. That is the honest, complete picture as of today, built directly from official statements, Pentagon confirmations, and reporting from multiple credible news organizations. We have tried to separate what is confirmed from what remains uncertain, because in a story this consequential, that distinction matters enormously. Let's also take a moment to look more closely at the men and women behind these casualty numbers. Sergeant Angel Rampersad, 28 years old, was from Ozone Park in New York and had originally been listed as missing before the Pentagon confirmed his death. He was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 57th Air Defense Artillery Regiment, part of a unit based in Ansbach, Germany. Private Isabella Gonzalez was just 19 years old and from Carrollton, Texas, while First Lieutenant Tyler James Feehan, 25, was from Ewa Beach, Hawaii. These three were killed together in the attack on Jordan's Muwafaq Salti air base, a base that had largely avoided Iranian strikes until recent days. That detail matters, because it shows Iran has deliberately widened its target list to include a country that hosts American troops but had not previously been a frequent target. A separate soldier was also killed in Iraq during a controlled detonation involving a downed Iranian drone, adding a fourth name to the list of losses in recent days alone. Taken together, these deaths represent a sharp acceleration in American casualties compared to earlier phases of this conflict. Let's return briefly to that Senate hearing, because the exchange between Hegseth and Senator Durbin captured just how contested these numbers have become. Hegseth's $37.5 billion figure was presented as the expected cost through the end of the fiscal year, covering things like troop pay and operational expenses. But CBS News reporting suggests that figure conveniently leaves out costs tied to rebuilding military infrastructure damaged in the fighting, including facilities in Jordan. If those reconstruction costs get added later, the final bill presented to American taxpayers could look very different from what was stated on Capitol Hill this week. It's also worth highlighting how differently officials on each side are framing the same battlefield. American officials describe strikes as targeted efforts against military logistics and drone infrastructure meant to protect shipping lanes. Iranian state media, by contrast, frames its own retaliatory strikes as a defense of national sovereignty against what it calls unprovoked aggression. Neither framing should be taken as neutral truth, and viewers should treat both as competing narratives rather than settled fact. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end.